Welcome back to the Government Operations Committee meeting of the Vermont Senate on Wednesday, the 14th of May. And we're joined by Ledge Counsel Tucker Anderson, and we're going to walk through the language now of H504. And I appreciate your being so punctual. We have heard from Representative Howard, Representative Pisano, and also the mayor of the city, Mike Duchess. So welcome, and if we can walk us through the language of the bill. We probably won't vote this out today, but probably tomorrow.
Okay. Well, good afternoon, Tucker Anderson, Legislative Counsel, with all those other excellent witnesses. What more is there to say?
Yeah, exactly.
We will pick up on page 2 of H504, at least in the copy that I'm looking at, which is the unofficial copy. You're familiar with section 1, which approves the charter amendment and states the date on which the voters approved these charter amendments. I'll note that this particular bill actually contains 2 charter amendments. There was one at the general election and one right at the annual city meeting, combines it into one bill for your convenience.
Mm-hmm.
Section 2 amends the city charter. First, in section 5.3, governing ordinance violations, instead of having a set statutory fine, the city is electing to cross-reference the general law, 24 VSA section 1974, which allows for ordinance penalties up to $800. In section 8.5, we are going to work through 2 substantive increases to grand list taxes that are set in the city charter. I can discuss some of the legal significance that's involved with having these taxes set in the charter. I will note that most of what you see, technical corrections that I added in order to correct the way that the figures were set out, the actual numbers. So the first substantive amendment is in subdivision 5, and these are the taxes required for the replacement of fire equipment, and the increase is from 0.0175 on the dollar of the grand list to 0.0225. Okay. In subdivision 7, this was the result of a Ways and Means amendment, but was also initially proposed by the city. It was just missed in drafting the bills introduced. Subdivision 7 removes police equipment from the tax set by that subdivision, and that is because the new subdivision 10, which is all underlined, assesses a new tax required for the replacement of police equipment, which shall not exceed 0.018 on the dollar of the grand list, unless a larger sum has been authorized by the voters of the city in a meeting warned for that purpose. The question came up in the House, why set this in charter? Is this different from what other municipalities do? In general, the way that these grand list taxes come about in other municipalities is that first, the budgetary items are proposed. So, for example, the town of Tuckertown proposes through its legislative body to spend $20,000 on fire equipment for the upcoming fiscal year. If it's approved by the voters as part of the overall budget, then the tax on the grand list as a whole is set to meet whatever the approved budget is. What the city has done by setting this in the charter is that they have a floor for what the grand list tax for these specific purposes is going to be. And of course, if a higher budget amount for any of these purposes is set, the tax on the grand list could be adjusted just as any other municipality.
All floor, no ceiling.
All floor, no ceiling. Yes.
And
Yes, Senator Clemson.
so they could conceivably, if they needed yet another police cruiser, they could say for this year, we're going to increase that X amount. And they just can't go below that, but they could add for a year or 2 or whatever they need.
Right. They would at least have this base amount set for
Which
the upcoming
they already
fiscal year, and the city council could propose for purposes of voter approval a higher amount for some other purpose.
But they already have. Well, the only thing that's actually getting changed in any of this is the way the numbers are identified and the amount for the fire.
For the fire and the new assessment for police equipment,
Right.
which is subdivision.
Right, in the new part. Which,
Yes, any questions?
and to question for Mike, really, is there any, are the police and fire a little sore at the difference, at the disparity between the two figures? Are they not wanting equity in the amount that's allocated for them?
Do you mind if I disagree?
Not at all.
We have 6 fire trucks, and each one to replace at this point would cost $1 million. We have 8 police vehicles, and each one to replace would cost
Or a lot less.
$85,000.
Yeah, you mentioned.
So that's where the disparity is.
Yeah. Yeah, okay, thanks.
Okay.
Sorry.
All right. Moving into section 17.3, this eliminates the threshold figure in the purchasing policy requirement in the city charter, which under current law is $3,000, triggers a bid, and here it instead would tie it to the purchasing policy adopted by the city. So no more charter set figure
Right.
for triggering a bid. In section 36.5, this is going to deal with the city's redevelopment authority. And if you move into the new language proposed for subdivision A1, it articulates the membership of the authority, which includes the city treasurer, 1 member appointed by the Board of Aldermen for a 1-year term, 6 members who shall be residents of the city for their respective terms, appointed by the mayor with approval of the board, 1 member who shall be a property owner within the city, and a resident of Rutland County, but not necessarily a resident of the city, appointed by the mayor with approval of the board. Members shall serve for 3-year terms under subsection B. Under subsection C, you have base setting for the staggering of terms in the future. So these are all transitional provisions that take effect on April 1st in staggered years relating to the terms of the members. And in subsections D and E, you have technical corrections related to the organization of this section. Is set to take effect on passage, and that was all that I have for you for the city development charter amendments for 2025.
We do have a section 2A, which we have talked about,
Oh, yeah.
which
Yes,
re-alphabetizes
West Rutland.
the list of towns.
How that get the redesignation of Westland to nature, it is in alphabetical order, despite the fact that there is actually no charter.
Exactly.
There's just a chapter heading and
Right.
a lovely history note.
That's okay with that. With your absence, Tanya, remember.
And as a 22-year resident of West Rutland, the Golden Horde, I think.
Well, it's important to check up on these things. We did a little bit of a research experiment in House government operations a couple weeks ago and discovered that the town of Windsor charter was not posted on the online version of the statutes by LexisNexis and had to follow up to say, where's the charter? So always good.
Yeah.
But it was found.
So what you had a question?
Yeah, I had one question. Well, just want to make sure it was found. Just
It was
to be clear.
found.
Okay, good.
Yeah, we have.
I was like, hold up, that's a pretty important town. But then the second question I had was, we had spoken a little bit earlier about the property owner but not resident thing of the town or of the city. How many other charters have that? How many other governing boards? Is that common or is that?
So I can't think of any that are tied to property ownership within a municipality. I did note in the other body when a similar question came up that actually any municipality is capable, not only for appointments, but also for elections, of allowing municipal officers to come from other municipalities. Non-residents are capable of filling certain municipal offices based on town votes.
Oh, okay.
Here you have the city and the city voters approving, for purposes of the charter, the appointment of a non-resident to a city office, provided that this qualification
Okay.
property owner within the city.
So they could just do non-resident point blank, but they've kind of added an additional qualification, and that additional qualification is allowed.
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, they voted to allow it.
Yeah, no, I had originally when I read it, I thought it was trying to say that you had to be in the town and own property. And I thought, isn't that don't we kind of not allow you to discriminate based on property ownership? But, okay, but then it was explained to me,
Right.
so I appreciate that.
And
Thanks.
what we're talking about also for purposes of elections.
Yeah.
And here you have an appointed position with a specific qualification.
Right.
For
We
the
want
nomination.
to have skin in the game in the city.
Any other questions for Tucker?
You're reporting my assumption.
Yes, I'll report it.
You are.
And no more questions.
You are the senator. So,
Okay, thank you, Tucker.
Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you. I see we've been joined by the Secretary of State's office and Mr. Weiss and, Tim Devlin. So, do we need a break or do we want to just roll on? Roll on.
Roll on, okay.
thank you very much.
You're very welcome, Mary. Always good to see you.
See you.
Safe travels, Michael.
Thank you.
See you. So Tim, you could join us if you would. Yes. Everybody should have a copy of this, thanks to, again, Jillian, who prepares much better than I do most of the time. This is draft 4.2, and will incorporate some of the changes that we had talked about the last time we had looked at the bill. So I'll let Tim run through the changes and we'll continue to consider the bill.
Well, thank you very much for having me, Chair Collmore. For the record, my name is Tim Devlin, Legislative Counsel. Indeed, committee members, you have before you draft 4.2 of the strike all amendment to be offered by this committee to H 474, appointing selection bill. This the shorthand is called. The changes to this version are highlighted in blue.
Okay.
So you have yellow highlights, which are the changes being proposed by this committee to date. And then the latest round being blue, just to kind of contrast from this. And then everything underlying may not be changing the bill, but that really reflects what came over from the House. It's kind of good.
Senator Clark.
Tim, in the future, may we make a plea to have a lighter blue used?
Sure, I'm not sure how it,
This is
it does
not
quite
readable.
feel. Yeah, sorry about that.
That's
Yeah.
okay. I just, it's a good thing they're younger eyes in the committee. Might be
I'd be glad to read it.
It's
Yeah,
very visible on the internet.
online.
Very, very
It's very easy to read,
Okay.
but harder in. Right. Okay.
Should make it.
So the first change is on.
Page 5.
page
And
five.
Chair Collmore, if you'd like, I can keep a pretty high level, and then maybe jive into the.
Yeah, unless somebody has a specific question, we'll just allow Tim to stay at 40,000 feet and continue through.
Sounds good.
So the first new batch of changes can be found in sections 9 through 12. This is regarding write-in candidates. And you'll recall that this bill will have write-in candidates. Let's see, that is, in order to have their votes counted, we'll have to file a form not later than 5 p.m. on Thursday preceding the primary election. That's not changing. What is changing is that kind of notwithstanding language that was in there before. That is being substituted with essentially a qualifier that says the write-in candidate does not have to file a form, which is again kind of a substitute for consent candidacy form, unless the candidate does not have to file that form if the candidate if there's a candidate whose name is printed on the ballot dies, or if there are no names printed on the ballot. And this is embodying a recommendation coming over from the Secretary of State's office, and it's based on a Michigan statute. Let's see, Michigan Health Law, section 168.737A, anyone's that interested. And the effect is that the vast majority of cases, will have to file before an election in order to win, regardless of the number of votes received.
So I thought we walked around that provision. In other words, if someone doesn't file, but receives the most votes?
That is what's being removed here and replaced by this other kind of circumstance where really, so it stands, you have to file. If you don't, your votes won't be counted. Unless somebody dies or there's no names printed on the ballots, in which case if you don't file your form, then that's not going to block you from having your votes counted.
Oh, that's. Confusing.
Yeah,
But it also still could lead to the situation where someone wins the election but doesn't win the election. It's like it could still lead to a situation where someone gets the most votes and they don't win the election.
How many cases like this do we have?
Would it be unlikely? Yes.
I have a huge problem with that.
Yeah.
With what?
So if Tanya is a incumbent and decides to run again, and I have not run in the past ever, but I'm a write-in candidate and I missed the deadline. But for whatever reason, I stand in front of the poll and I'm happy and jumping around and everybody says, yeah, looks like a good guy. I'll vote for that guy. And I wind up getting more votes than Tanya. I'm not going to be declared the winner.
In that hypothetical, your votes would not be counted unless
I die.
Yeah.
a candidate
Otherwise
on the
disqualified.
ballot, or there are no names.
What is, the other one is otherwise disqualified. I didn't really know what that meant, but,
I'm trying to pull.
Yeah,
up
this is,
so I can read it. I think this is very confusing.
We did have, so the Secretary of State presented this concept to us last time, and I think we kind of had the back and forth debate of what is the likelihood of someone to win, it doesn't matter. And the term we had was, is it operative to actually do this without, like, is it, how likely is this scenario to happen? So,
nonetheless,
I just think it's really problematic to be creating a situation where someone could get the most votes and not win.
Yeah, I do too. That's odd.
well, did we define what otherwise disqualified means too?
That's not defined here, but it would capture things like if they're they move out of state, residency requirement.
Okay.
That's the one that jumps to mind. What are the other qualifications for running for office or voting and holding office? So age, citizenship, and residency. Once they're in mind, I mean, I guess you could give up your citizenship and move to a different country, but essentially.
So we could probably identify that on the floor as being, here's what that means. But I do agree with Senator Bielowski. I think we need to maybe put a question mark on this. And maybe the Secretary of State's office can help us. Because I do think just from a visual, not a visual, but just from a public point of view, I got more votes, but I lost to her. How does that, I mean, I don't understand how that could,
Very hard to justify.
people would not be too happy, I don't think. So we probably need to fashion something else here.
Particularly is there's increased support for national popular vote. I mean,
I guess you're right. At the federal level, we do already have a system where people can get the most votes and not win, but I don't think that's good democracy.
Okay, I put a question mark there.
The electoral college.
oh, yes, exactly. We have this already.
But I don't think we should, even if it is unlikely that a write-in candidate would win, I don't think we should be putting into law any situation in which the person who gets the most votes would have the possibility of losing.
I mean, we ask the Secretary of State's office, how you two, does this ever happen?
For the record, Lauren Hibbert, Deputy Secretary of State, and
Sean Sheehan, Elections Director.
we have not found an instance where this has happened, where there's been a named candidate on a ballot and a write-in candidate won, which is why we proposed this. The reality of having write-in candidates be counted, if they don't file the consent, and it is not an instance where someone is not named or otherwise disqualified or dead, is that clerks will have to count all of those names, because there's no way to know whether somebody won or not without conducting a count. So operationally, it's very hard to be able to know in write-in candidates, is there a winner, unless you count the write-in candidates. And the goal here is to make it easier for the town clerks on election night to be able to know which write-in candidates they need to count.
Was there not a phrase in an earlier iteration that said unless that candidate receives the most votes, in which case that candidate will be the winner?
There was a phrase called nevertheless. And we found that to be very confusing. Some people read that to read exactly like you're reading it. Others read it the way that we were saying, which is that you don't have to count. So we were recommending taking that word out, nevertheless, because it is confusing. And if the goal is to count write-in candidates who declare that they want to run and write-in candidates for races where there's nobody named or someone is deceased or otherwise disqualified, we think this language does that. And on the ground for clerks, that makes it considerably easier and more streamlined on election night. I can't argue against someone's belief that all write-ins should be counted. It's just we're advocating that it's easier on election night for clerks. If you are interested in being a write-in candidate, you would know, presumably, by the Thursday before, and you would file the paperwork, or you would be a write-in candidate where there was no one named and where, or somebody was disqualified.
Or somebody died.
Or somebody died, right?
Because we had that since this year in Bennington.
Exactly, right, that was what we talked about last time was, write-in candidates knew well before election day that they wanted to run, and did so and were counted and would have been in this instance.
Yeah, so in the Bennington case, right, because the death happened well before that Thursday before the election, they would have had plenty of time to register, number one. But with the new language, even if that death occurred the day before the election, right, if it happened on Monday, then everybody would have been counted in there. And that's really I think the logistical piece to it. One, I think as the Deputy Secretary says, we haven't seen that in the past. Two, we seem even less likely to see it in the future, again, for county legislative and statewide seats, because so many Vermonters increasingly vote early. You have fewer people that are waiting till that Sunday, Monday, Tuesday to vote, making it even less likely that a write-in candidate would be a named candidate. But lastly, and finally, all of it here in this change is to move Vermont to the majority of states that do have registered write-ins and the rules around it. And for only counting that way, if you were to say, unless somebody wins, you would have to know if they win. To know if they would win, you would need all the votes to be reported, which would mean all the votes would have to be counted. So there wouldn't be any reason to make all of these changes, which had been proposed in the first place.
And this becomes particularly pertinent when we're talking about a race that is in multiple towns. Like if it's a one-town race, it may be easier for a clerk to know, wow, there's someone who's written in quite a bit. But on election night, if it's a Senate race, for instance, that's multiple towns. And how would the clerks know that there was someone who might win the write-in unless there was a disqualification or this consent, because they are frequently in places without communication with each other. And they wouldn't know, like, let's say it's a 5-town Senate district and each of you were the clerk of a town and I was running, Senator White could have 2 votes for me in her district, but Senator Comer, you could have 75, and Senator White would not know that I was winning so much in your town. So that's why we were trying to create this candidate form to be registered as a write-in. Balancing access to the ballot, although there's many, many, many points for access to the ballot. This is just one of many choices. And how it works on the ground, what elections are like on the ground.
I mean, to me, it is bigger than just an access to the ballot issue when if someone wins, they might not actually win. Like that is a much bigger issue. Like I've always thought that this was limiting democracy and limiting access to the ballot. But when we're now saying like, actually what this operationally means is that someone could get the most votes and not win. It to me is a much larger democracy issue. And I just don't think at this point in time, with what we're looking at at the federal level and what we're looking at with the dismantling of democracy, we should be doing anything that could even be perceived as limiting democracy.
Well, we are one of the only states that has this long of a wait time for a write-in candidate to have to put something in. So I am philosophically persuaded by your point, but don't think the incremental improvement in democracy is, I think someone said earlier, the juice is worth the squeeze. And I'm happy to, I can't think of a single write-in that's won a state Senate seat ever.
I think we had one upstairs from Bennington.
He wasn't a write-in.
Yes, he was.
Yeah,
He was a write-in on the primary of someone who passed away.
Yeah,
But he won a write-in campaign.
it was a primary,
Yeah.
right?
But
So,
this is the exact.
no, I understand that, but prior to that, I would have heard, well, there's never been someone who's run a write-in campaign. And now we're like, oh, well, it happened in this instance, so we need to make an exception for that. And what other instances
Well, they
are
wouldn't
we
be
not
not
making
making decision.
the exceptions for? I think it's also important to note that we are also one of the most accessible voting states and most democratic voting states in the country, perhaps in large part because we don't do things exactly the same way as the rest of the country.
Yeah, but I think the main way that we're a state that has better access to democracy is because of mail-in voting. And that even shrinks that risk to even smaller versus having hours of people not knowing what the result of the vote is.
I think if we were to go back to registration being election night, we solve for this problem.
Oh.
I guess I don't know how that would work.
I can't support limiting democracy.
Fair enough.
And the write-in that we're making an exception for here prior to this past election cycle had never happened. So just because this is unlikely and has never happened doesn't mean it couldn't happen. It doesn't mean we couldn't find ourselves in a spot where we have made a law that says if you get the most votes, you don't win the election.
But I think the reason that decision was made for for Senator Plunkett to run as a write-in in that situation was because there was not clarity on this exact topic. So they chose a less good path, or not less good, I don't know. They chose a path because there was a lack of clarity. They could have chosen a different path. I think if you don't know that you want to seek an elected office, at least the Thursday before, that's probably a bad candidate. Like, I just don't, unless there's an exigent, if there's a circumstance that is outside of your control, like someone passing away, like something, you really should know to be a serious candidate.
My point is the argument is being made that we can limit democracy in this way. We can put a law in the books that clearly says the candidate that gets the most votes might not win because this has never happened before. And regardless of what pathway Senator Plunkett chose, he also won a write-in campaign in a way that had never happened before. So just because it's never happened before doesn't mean it couldn't happen. And we will still be a state that has a law in the books that says if you get the most votes in this circumstance, you will not win the election.
Okay.
Let me just suggest that we put a asterisk next to that provision. And I know it's repeated the notwithstanding language at least twice or three times more. Because I find myself in agreement with that. And you know, that's fine. That happens. I just,
That's not a bad thing.
Yeah,
I
no,
didn't mean to
happens
imply it
quite
was. I
frequently.
didn't mean to imply it was. It's a little unusual perhaps,
It's true. Yeah, you're on a different pole. Yeah.
but it is troubling that we could be putting in place something that could mean someone with the most votes doesn't win. I don't know how to explain it any other way.
Yeah, I think that's about.
And
Is that a fair way of putting it?
I think, on hypotheticals, it's hypothetically, there could be a situation where somebody does that, but hypothetically, you could have everybody mail their ballot in on Monday and all those ballots arrive Wednesday, and people that cast their votes for a different candidate could have won. Hypothetically, you could have candidates not, or voters not follow the guidance of filling in the dots or signing the back of of their mail-in ballot. And if you were to count those, if they had cured those ballots, but they didn't cure them, hypothetically, there could be different results as well. So I think when you go into hypotheticals, anything could happen. But I think when we look at the numbers of what has happened, we look at the case of when ballots are sent back, we look at when defective ballots are cured, you get a sense of what's realistically possible to happen. And we don't see anything possible outside of the realm of, like we said, a candidate, dying or there being no named candidates. Looking at the other states that have, again, much earlier dates to have to register, and the triggers that they have. We didn't even see any with the no named candidates on there. So we thought that would be one that would make sense for Vermont to add. So Vermont would still be the most lenient, both in terms of having the latest registration date and having these extra rules triggers for counting people where there could be a scenario of other people coming in. I think for moving the date back, the question of doing it on election night or where it would happen, I know that any of those things, it's certainly up to this body to decide. I think my concern on that, our concern was that for people to have faith in democracy and our democratic institutions and elections, we need elections to operate the way they are written in law for the clerks, for the BCA to be able to, fulfill the guidance, have those duties. For us, looking at the way the elections were this year, when there were the cyber threats, there were various other threats on our elections, we gave clerks the guidance of printing out all of their tally sheets, their summary sheets, their voter checklists the Friday before, so that in case there was a cyber attack, in case systems were down, in case electricity was down on Monday and Tuesday, they'd be able to conduct elections. We would be able to count those votes. Vermonters would be able to have faith in our democratic institutions. By doing the Thursday night, as I think that some of the clerks had recommended, coming into the Secretary of State's office, that gives my team, even if there's dozens, even if there's hundreds of requests by Vermonters to have their votes counted, my team can stay late Thursday night, making sure that they're all entered. The clerks can have that information ready to print out on their summary sheets on Friday. It's not to say it can't be moved later, but that introduces, I think, greater risk of guidance not getting clear, introduces greater risk of the elections not being counted the way statute is written.
Okay, so let's
And
put
then
that.
really, I
Go
think
ahead.
to your point about people not potentially making a mistake, we've expanded democracy by allowing ballot curing. I think to your point about ballots arriving late, I've always argued that it should be postmarked by and not received by, so that more votes are counted. I think I'm pretty consistent in arguing for the most accessible democracy possible. And this flies in the face of that. And not every state has this requirement at all. Just because lots of them do doesn't mean every state does. So we would not be the most lenient of all of the states. We would be the most lenient of the states that have this requirement.
Okay, so I think we need to at least revisit this and talk more about it as a committee and.
Or simplify it somehow. I think part of the problem for me is so convoluted, the language, but.
Well, I'm not sure we're gonna do that on the fly today.
No, I don't either, just saying.
So, page 7, Tim, is also, the same wording at the top of the page, notwithstanding, and then if you want to halfway down, I think it says the same thing in a different way.
Yes, in sections, 9 through 12, there will be 3 similar iterations. And then, I think it's section 11 has more of the mechanical aspect of what's being offered here. Yeah. Would the committee like me to move on to the campaign finance changes? Sure. Okay. So now turning to section 13. We have, the bill is currently constructed, candidates register with the Secretary of State. In the subsequently file consent forms that have matching information. This the changes in blue here now directly references all three consent candidacy form statutes rather than the just one that was previously. So we had just primaries in there before. This will now be for will reference consent forms that are required by primaries, nomination by party committee, or for independent candidates in general election. Okay. Also, section 13 should point out that one candidates register for the Secretary of State, they must now file their treasurer information at that time. And prior to a filing consent form, this changes the timing from the House proposal of filing that treasurer information at the time of expenditure.
Which,
And actually, no.
Okay.
Sections 15 through 17. This gets into what was previously kind of understood as the super PAC terminology. And so this adopts the Secretary of State's proposed new definitions. And again, this will remove the old definition of independent expenditure of only political committee and replace it with the definition termed self-funded person acting alone on public question, or self-funded person acting alone unaffiliated with candidate. And would the committee like me to read through that definition, or there's another substantive part below it?
I've read it 4 or 5 times over, so.
Yeah, maybe layman's terms for
Yeah,
what it means.
Okay.
Sure. So the essentially kind of rephrase it. The idea is that it should be the definition captures a single individual at least, and then also some other entities. So one individual, corporations, labor organizations, public interest groups, or other entities. And then qualifies that with a few different factors. One being the amount either taking in or expending, which is $1,000. And then also that's qualified by a 2-year general election cycle.
Okay.
And then let's see, and then an emphasis on the fact that they would be conducting their activities independent of candidates. So not in coordination, which you'll see with other political action committees or just regular PACs. So this is putting apart so individuals that captures potentially independently wealthy individuals that are seeking to influence the election, but are not orchestrating those efforts with the candidate. Or the other side of the coin is other, public questions.
Okay, so this is, could it be a general, could it be a group of candidates that they're supporting, or it could even be one individual candidate, technically, they just couldn't work with that individual candidate in any circumstances.
Yes, this definition would have somebody, it's really, cornerstone is determining factors independence from other candidates. So whether it's multiple candidates or just one, that doesn't really matter as long as this entity or individual or whatever group is spending funds really without any orchestration of tactics.
But if I spent, let's say I was someone who really disagreed with the bill the legislature did.
Mhm.
And I ran a campaign that said, unelect all the people who voted for S802. And I gave 250 to this district, 250 to this, 250 to this, and 250 to that. That as boom, you have to register.
That would be something else. That'd just be a regular PAC.
Oh, okay. So they'd already had it
donating
ready.
to those. So this is an entity that's collecting information and spending it itself, not redirecting it to other entities.
Okay, but I could spend $250 to run an ad and run,
Yes.
or $250, because that's, I think, where people have been making the distinction is they're not even like giving it to the candidate or supporting a specific candidate. It's like they're purchasing in different places ads that relate to a political ideology or theme. Yeah, that's so, but you now, if you spend, okay, that makes sense. This is
This is-
narrowing it in a way that is very.
Well, this is capturing a different category of actors.
Yeah.
Is how I characterize it. And this is actually just the definitional aspect. The more substantive is found in section 17, which will rename 17 VSA 2970 as campaign reports, other entities, political action committees, self-funded presenting alone on public questions and unaffiliated with candidate campaigns. And as a new, new subsection B, which will state, this is the reporting part, any self-funded person acting alone on public question or self-funded person acting unaffiliated with candidate is the term, who makes expenditures of $1,000 or more during an election cycle for the purpose of advocating a position on a public question or influencing the election, influencing an election, any election, shall file a report of the expenditures within 30 days before, 10 days after, and 2 weeks after the election. So this is just a standard reporting thing. So
This is great because we have this exact scenario where someone was campaigning against mail-in voting conceptually in our town on our local election. And this individual spent, I would expect, more than $1,000, but because they were, so now they would have to report it. And before it was $5,000 or was there ever a limit on this group before on how much money they could spend?
as the statutes are now, really, they contemplate committees really being of 2 or more individuals. And so this bill
Yes.
will kind of
It has
reconfigure what is.
one dude doing it. Okay, thank you.
Senator Bielski.
So I have concern and continue to have concern. I frankly think anyone spending any money, I don't care if you spent $1 influencing an election or a candidate, you spent $1, I think it should be reported for transparency's sake.
No.
Currently, the candidate threshold is at 500 and this
Yeah.
threshold is at 1,000. And we heard from someone, and I don't remember whom, that lowering this to 500 could be viewed as a constitutional problem. And I'm wondering, Tim, what your view is on that, because here's my sort of thought behind it, because I know you're an attorney and I'm gonna ramble and then let you answer my question. We are not limiting how much someone can spend. We're simply saying they have to disclose it. And so I would understand under Citizens United that there would be a problem if we said you can only spend $1,000, but I don't understand how saying you have to disclose what you're spending is a constitutional concern for anyone.
That is correct. Citizens United, being the kind of salient case that reconfigured the political landscape when it came to political spending and campaign contributions and expenditures in our country. This is U.S. Supreme Court decision. I'm sure everybody has heard that at this point. And what it did was it prohibited state and federal laws that would impose any sort of stricture or limitation on the expenditure of funds. And then there's been a series of circuit court decisions around the country, which have kind of gotten to a different feature, which is the in these get into how much various entities accept as contributions. And similarly, our Second Circuit, which we're in, hasn't weighed in on this yet, but it's been the DC Circuit, the Ninth Circuit, and various other ones. There, I would say there's a consensus building that also there should be no limitations placed on contributions being accepted too. But what is still permitted explicitly was in Citizens United is disclosure requirements and the regulation of those. So while you cannot regulate in really a real effect the contribution or expenditure of these funds, and really certainly the expenditure of these funds, disclosure can be regulated. And so where the thresholds are, the type of activity that.
And it doesn't matter if I'm the candidate or one of a PAC or a corporation, what that amount wouldn't need to be different.
As far as disclosing,
Yes.
Well, registering, we're dealing with two things here. Like, when does an entity register with the Secretary of State to be kind of recognized, and what thresholds do they have to report under, and when? Those amounts can be
We can set.
set that. Yeah, they can. I don't want to say fluctuate, but the state legislatures are certainly empowered to.
Which we're doing here.
Right, to the extent that they want to somehow make it impossible to frustrate speech in some other way.
Okay.
So it kind of qualify that.
That is helpful because I think the number that you should have to report, that I don't think there should be a threshold that you should have to report everything. But if we're not going to get there, and I suspect we won't, at the very least, I don't think that these organizations should be at a higher threshold than a candidate.
Sure, I'm not against it. I think we actually talked a little bit about
We
this
did,
before.
and that's why I wanted the attorney to weigh in on the Constitution.
Yeah, that was our big rebuttal was, oh, Citizens United would say, boom.
And so that's why I wanted to ask Tim that question, because it didn't make sense to me that Citizens United would do that, and so I wanted to.
I would be very supportive of a change like that. Lower from 1,500, but I don't know what your appetite is, Mr. Chair, for suggestions of changes.
I don't know if I have to tell you this either.
Okay, well then we'll put a pin in it.
We seem to be making all of this very complicated, in my view, to the point where if I run again, which I have every intention of, I'm gonna have to hire somebody just to read the statute to figure out if we're in compliance or not. And I'm not sure that's a healthy way to do things.
I think so, not unless you accept a lot of PAC. I mean, this is mostly for PACs, right? This is
Well,
for-
this provision, but we've got other provisions, which again, just, it seems like every time we put an elections bill together, it gets complicated
Well,
and
it is
controversial.
complicated. It's complicated law, as Sean knows sadly better than us. And if we could distill it in simple language, what we're doing here, that would be helpful.
Yeah, I
So-
think that's where we're struggling.
I think we just need to translate it into lay language for everybody to appreciate, which is we are doing what, Tim, in lay language?
We are identifying,
What we used to
numerous,
call super PACs.
We're identifying super PACs and we're asking that they register, that they
Yeah.
File.
register.
register if they make expenditures of $1,000 or more.
yes,
But we could make that equal at $500, the same as an individual.
yes.
So if corporations and super PACs are supposed to be treated like people, why don't we make them equal to people?
There's a lot of things done. But
Let's put a pin in it.
Let's put a pin in it and think about at 500. Is there a reason we couldn't do that, Sean?
So I think to Senator Boyowski's point, I'm trying to recall who it was that said that. It was me.
All of us are
I should
having
say that.
this feeling.
Yeah, I think from that point, again, our office doesn't have strong feeling on threshold, but we worked closely with this language on the attorney general's office. As
I
they're
appreciate
with
this language has been well vetted.
with
by- I
enforcement.
get that.
Yes, and so what I did say last time was that I think if the threshold were to propose being changed or lowered, I should ask you to take testimony from the Attorney General's office. It was the Attorney General's office that told us that there'd been court cases, again, separate, it's not limiting the amount, but even just foreseeing what a barrier, at some point, having speech dollar value, it's a barrier. I think as Senator Cullimore is referring to, it's a barrier to the task of reporting. And what the Attorney General's office told us was that $1,000 is a threshold that has survived court challenges for disclosure in other places. When it's gone south of $1,000 is when there's been the court issues. And again, from their side, I would suggest taking testimony right from them, not taking my game of telephone from it. But that was what we heard, and that was part of the background behind that side. I think to the point of communicating, and certainly with our campaign finance guide and the communications we do through clerks and when people file for public questions and others, that's really when we try to put things into layman's language and can use diagrams and charts to see where people land up and where they should be filing on our new campaign finance website, where people would file, both candidates and and advocacy organizations in these cases would be able to walk them through, okay, are you an individual? Are you more than one? Are you self-funded? And that's where I think it would be able to take them in a more step-by-step, logical, easier to follow manner than reading statute.
We have traditionally actually had lots of candidates who are self-funded, who don't feel like they can go out and raise money from others. So I think we actually have a significant number of people who self-fund because the cost of our races is so low.
Yeah.
Modest compared to
Yeah, there aren't changes on the candidate side because that's already existed. You are allowed to self-fund and you report your
Right.
self-funding in the ledger of
Yeah,
campaign finance system walks it
Very
through. So
good.
really, what this change is doing is just really closing that loophole for people who aren't candidates, but they're acting alone and they're influencing
And they're trying to
the elections of
influence an election.
candidates or.
So we have an election coming up in 26 for people may try to influence it with proposal 3.
Yeah, or I guess what I was trying to hint at before, but I didn't necessarily want to be so bold about it. But if you were an individual who was very wealthy and didn't like climate change related legislation, you could spend $999 all across the state to buy ads to diss on people who care about a certain issue,
Yeah.
is kind of my understanding. Or to promote them versus if I as a candidate wanted to run a specific ad against Brian because of a great vote he took in favor of something good on climate change, I would have to disclose that any amount. You know what I'm saying? So
Yeah, I
it
do.
means
I
that,
do.
yeah, so I guess I really am so an individual now is able to spend up to $999 on any issue they want across the state. They can actually spend it on a ton of different issues technically, but we don't resolve that fully. Do you get what I'm saying? So it means that there are certain very wealthy individuals in the state who are benefiting from this loophole, whether or not it's $1,000 or $500. And I think at the very least, we should know who those people are.
And that's what we're attempting to accomplish in this.
Yeah, that's my bottom line. So that's why I think we should keep it in.
And
I don't think
honestly,
it's
having done a
partisan.
race with you, you and I both know that $999 in advertising doesn't get you very far.
That's true.
So, I mean.
Mhm.
So I'm not unhappy with the amount. I just would love to have it equal to people.
Well, let's raise ours then.
Oh, yeah, then go the other way. Yeah.
No, I think ours it should be 500.
What were our age change? Yeah, but still, I feel like we didn't do a lot.
Okay, and if you're going to make the crucial the other changes, we're
Yes.
putting a question mark by.
We only have one more section, I think. I looked at it.
Oh, okay.
And this is regarding justices of the peace, deadline for those individuals. This is in section 25.6 of the bill, and this will adjust the deadline for justices of the peace to file their consent forms. So that matches when those justices are nominated as the third Monday before each primary election. So just kind of bringing two related statutes in conformity with each other.
Aren't they elected in November?
This is independent. No.
Yeah.
Throw the general ballot.
The
GPs, yeah.
That's when we.
Oh, I see.
Yes.
So why don't we just make it the same as us? Why aren't all election consent forms due at the same time? If it's all in November, we're all elected in November, why don't we just make all consent forms? Sean, you have an idea?
No, well, currently some are required to have your name printed for the primary. So there's an instance where one batch is wait for that point, then
Right,
the other two, if you're independent, or let's see, yep, that would be for the general. So if you are nominated by committee, that would be in preparation for the general.
so well, why don't we just make it consistent with when the general consent forms are due?
Go ahead,
Yeah,
Chad.
so just for the piece, so they're all just on the November election. They're not
Yeah,
related to the
exactly.
primary. The reason here is because they're not involved with the primary and because this really was a workload for clerks issue. The way it currently stands is where it's after the primary that justice of peace are nominated by parties and independents can go on. That coincides with when clerks are doing their primary results. They're completing their canvas certification of results. And they're also trying to go through the paperwork and the consent forms, petitions for justices of the peace and get them entered into the system. So they'll be on the back of the general election ballot with UOCAVA and the deadlines and our producing of ballots. The biggest errors that we've found have been the spelling of justice of the peace names, other errors that are made when you have a situation where clerks in many small towns are working one day or 2 half days a week and have all these duties and responsibilities that follow in the week after a primary election and having to have this other duty of enter names into a system that we're then sending off to meet the ballot printing deadline so that they can be ready for the general election. Clerks then have to proof the backs of the ballot because we only know the information. Elections Division, Secretary of State only has the information to proof the front of the ballot and prepare it. The thought here was that because there was no real operative reason not related to the primary to wait till after the primary to have this nomination period, we talked to all three party directors and chairs. All were okay with moving it earlier. And in the House, it was moved into being in July. People can submit their justice of the peace, the parties can convene. That allows the clerks to then prepare their back of the ballot, at least the justice of the peace side, to proof it, to make sure there's no errors as the election comes up, as the primary happens. That then allows the rest of the ballot to be prepared, all the proofing to happen and to meet those deadlines. So the additional, that change already was made for the folks who were nominated by party committees and party caucuses. The additional change here was just to bring independent nominations in alignment with that party process so that all of those petitions could be reviewed.
So we're moving in a week, right? I mean, that's what it was. Instead of the fourth Monday, it's the third one. And all three parties said, okay. I wonder whether the clerks would like that extra week.
That's what I think is being reflected, is that this helped their workload.
Yeah.
That's what I'm hearing.
Yes,
Sean.
it's, as our understanding, it's the week is helping the workload. It was 6 days and we didn't know.
No, it crossed out here, that it was on the third day.
Across it was under current law. It's just after the primary election. So it's moving it back from that second week in August, moving it back to July, which we're the third day, right? So it was the third day following the primary election. So it was
Right.
the Friday after the primary election. And that's moving it.
All right.
Yeah, we're good with it.
I think that's it for the changes. So we're getting,
Unless we,
well, we're getting down to at least a couple things.
good work. We're winnowing it down to, any thoughts on, are you done, Tim?
Just one other comment, and I just wanted to reflect something that my colleague Tucker Anderson was working on before, and the committee hasn't really weighed in either way. And this is just about the appointment terms and removal of certain officials, and they're kind of open-ended question which way the committee wanted to go and whether they on those lenders to build have those one be removed. Remove the default of 1 year, or 2, add express language stating that these officers are be removed at will.
What's
Oh, well, I want at will.
Uh,
That's where I stood. But
remind,
if anyone-
what section is this?
let's see, I think it's.
This is, they changed in the House to like a strict, it's every year, but they're really just trying to get the issue of appointed versus elected folks and how they're treated as employees is kind
Yeah, so if they're appointed, it can be at will.
of. Mhm.
This is on pages 25, it's a series of municipal officers at the. Where they're reflecting the appointment of a municipal treasurer shall be for 1 year, and then there's another officer for 1 year. So there's a question of does this committee really want it to be for 1 year? The implication could have to be removed for good cause, or an express language saying that okay, they can be removed at will. Control this clears up what could possibly be a legal ambiguity.
Let's not be ambiguous, let's be at will.
That's what the
Everybody okay? Okay.
okay. And that's all for.
But that's not all, because we have a lot of question marks there, Tim.
Fair enough.
I only wanted 2.
I think we might be the question marks. I think
We are the question marks, Tim is clear, as is clearly Sean.
Yeah, we'll just, I guess, continue to discuss it.
Well, I have a question, Mr. Chair, which is, we discussed some of Tanya's bill. Was there anything in Tanya's bill that we felt could move on and add to this? And Tanya, I know, has given it some thought.
I've certainly given it some thought as to what would be the two pieces that would be my preference to add to this.
Well, your preference on what might be realistic, given we have a week. or two.
Hence when I tried to think of preference and realistic. Yes, I don't think that's a word. And that is adding in the penalties from my bill and Ruth's bill, the SED6
For not filing.
for not filing. And then the other piece was the free registration at the DMV for 16-year-olds.
Oh,
But I would
yes.
want to hear from the Secretary of State's office whether they have the technological capacity to sort of hold that list so that it goes live when those people are actually eligible to vote. So I don't know if you heard the walkthrough of the bill in conversation last time. But what the intent of that is to capture people who get their license at 16 and should be sort of automatically pendingly registered, but they may not go get another license until they're 20 to get pulled into the system. And so this was a mechanism to get them pulled into the system to just automatically go live when they turn 18. And I'm curious if that's something that would be able to be operationalized.
I'm gonna let Sean.
Okay.
She's using the word.
Right.
I am using.
It's an important word, so I appreciate it.
Yeah, the polling into the system, I think the question that's come up there, and I think looking for legal guidance, as I understand it in the past, has really been around the voters oath. So when you say automatically operationalized, is that voters are pulled in and are registered, come from DMV before they're 18, and it's pending the oath. So currently, yeah.
That is current
So-
state. So if I'm 16 and I register, you're brought into the system and you're pending, but you need to take your voter's oath.
Right.
But this is already.
Yes. But you have to take your voter's oath. So it doesn't just happen
Right,
automatically
because you have
when you turn 18.
at 18.
So how does it happen for someone? Say I, for some reason, wasn't registered to vote, obviously I am. And I went and got my license and I didn't check the opt-out box. So I get registered. I'm not 16, I'm older, significantly older than that. How does that voter's oath piece work for a non-16-year-old, for someone of the age of majority?
Could be the same. I think on the when you're at the DMV, there is the voter's oath piece on there. So if you're the age of majority, you're allowed to administer the oath to yourself. So that, I think, is the distinction. So you register right in and you're active right away. If you're not of the age of majority, my understanding is the interpretation is you're not allowed to administer the oath.
It's always been sad that we went to that, because I love giving people the oath and explaining the oath to them.
So then if I turn 18 and I show up at polls, can I take the oath there?
Yes.
Okay, so this is sort of already in existence.
It is.
And they're also in the system so the clerks can see, and there can be, outreach to. the
And is there a
voters.
flag for this part that they still need to take the oath?
Yes, yeah, and
Okay.
the reports that they have to do it, that they have voters who have turned 18 and are in the system. So they are in the system, can be reached.
Senator Flex?
So Sean, what data do we have on how many young people are taking advantage of this?
I can follow up on.
You know what, I think we'd appreciate that, because I was curious that we had our youth council present, and they didn't, not one of them presented anything about elections. And that was a curious thing to me, that they, that there wasn't So I'm just curious how many young
Yeah,
people are making
yeah.
it.
I just wanted to add that we did just complete our civics health index. And we did our first ever youth survey around democracy and civics. First in the nation who did it as part of their civic health index.
This is part of that great report you get.
Yes.
Yeah, it's fabulous.
And there is a statistic that I believe is 48% of the youth that were polled. I will have to double check, do not intend to register or vote.
Yes, it was very alarming.
It is
remember reading that.
alarming. I will have to like look at it, but it's almost half.
So I would love actually for us to be back with the youth council and give them that and say, what are you guys gonna do about that?
Yeah, young people, you fix it. I like it.
Well, young, it's a start. Is what would you do to address it? Or at least ask them how they might.
Teach civics.
Hey,
Oh, I wish we had
There's
those
lots of
specific
things.
requirements.
Oh, we definitely do.
this is a Dick, I heard Senator Dick McCormick.
I had the bill last year for this.
I know, reintroduce that bill.
Um,
I'm open to both of those things if we want to consider them in the bill, though. I just want to point that out.
Universal civics.
No,
that's maybe a bigger lift for 1 week left in the session. The other thing that was not in my bill that we went through that I do continue to stand by wanting is randomized name order on the ballot. And I have example legislation from both California and California, it does it the way that you had said would be your preference, would be to just let it randomly do it. And I have one from another state, but that was not in my bill, but it is something I would like to see us do.
And how many other states do it?
I can get you that information. It's not off the top of my head, but there are a handful that do. And
I
they
think
do it
that-
in different ways.
Right.
As much as I
Yeah.
love that idea, Tanya, be full to speak, I think maybe it would be a big discussion. It might be a little challenging at this point in the session.
it's always good to have things for conference committee.
Absolutely, you could just put that in there and people agree. Although the Cs, I think the C caucus here in this committee would have a little bit of a challenge with it.
Because you are benefiting from an unfair system. That's your alphabetical privilege.
And you know, boy, I worn that alphabet.
You really have.
Distinction.
Well,
We have our
I see Lord.
We have our
Gibbs
C
raise her hand.
sectors.
yeah,
We have our C.
Lauren.
Mr. Chair, I just wanted to respond to the fines, which
Yeah, I love to.
which is my understanding is an automatic charging of a fine to someone who doesn't register or file on time in our system. And we
Changed, you did change it.
we don't have an objection philosophically but we haven't. First of all, our system, our campaign finance system doesn't assess any money to anybody. We don't collect any money through our system. So it would be a relatively big system change for us that we haven't scoped in terms of cost and when we would be able to make that possible. And then, so that would be most applicable to people who filed late. The people who didn't file, that would require not only the system, but also staff time. And we haven't assessed how much staff time that would take. So I would say at this point, the Secretary of State's perspective is that would be hard to do in this session, but something that we'd love to talk through in the future.
But also we did increase them very modestly. You've been pursuing them more aggressively, I thought.
Well, I'm not sure.
Didn't you, $10 a day, or isn't there something that you
It was-
did recently that was an improvement? I do recall you did something.
I think we proposed.
It went into effect.
Don't we have?
There is a fee on the lobbying side, and I know.
It's not the lobbying side, it's on the candidate side.
I don't think so.
I don't
Yeah.
believe so. Our
Okay.
system is not built to
There's-
collect fines and the campaign finance.
No, not to collect them, but
Assess
To
them.
assess them.
assess.
Oh, maybe the Attorney General's office
Yes.
is doing that through enforcement.
Yes,
But my understanding of Senator Bohosky's bill, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is that let's say I'm running and I should be, and I have registered as a candidate and I filed, but then I hit the July 1st deadline and I failed to register and I don't register until August 15th. I believe her proposal is that I would be assessed automatically. It's sort of like a traffic ticket, a fine for failing to do that. And not that the Attorney General would have to take action against me.
So the proposal I have is that if someone hasn't filed or done the attestation or whatever it is, because we've changed it a little bit
Yep.
here, is that the Secretary of State's office would send a reminder and they would have 7 days to cure that. And at that 7-day mark after the reminder, a $10 per day fine would be assessed up to $1,000.
And the Secretary of State's office, under your proposal, would be the one collecting the fine.
Right.
And currently,
You have,
in
you're
the
not-
campaign finance space, we are not doing that. So we haven't built the system to be able to do that, which is how we would need to do it so that we could get paid. And,
so shaming is still like the number one way to get people to comply.
There is no, if we were to do something like that, but with a delayed effective date, would that give the Secretary of State's office the time needed? Because we don't, I mean, we've got more than a year before our next major statewide election.
It's still in April.
can I get
Right.
back to you? I don't want to answer off the cuff and I want to
Yeah.
understand all the ripple effects and,
Because I think Old
Yeah, we need it.
Beach rubs us all the wrong way.
It's still in
with us,
April.
you know,
You
we
have to
file
file.
on time and bunches.
Yeah.
Sadly, too many people don't.
Oh,
For-
there's
something.
people who still
Like I
haven't
did my
like closed out their
paperwork.
2020 campaigns. Like, it's ridiculous. Also,
Take it.
Allison, a study done in 2015 identified 20 states that use random assignment or rotating ballot. 20
County clerk,
states.
Oh,
and then they fought to give you.
Almost.
get on the ballot. Yeah, that's.
Well, we made it for
That was the date. April 20.
Happy to.
Yeah, we're gonna-
I mean, that was just a quick
Yeah,
Google
April
search, so I have not
22nd.
fact checked, but.
We'll probably have some more.
The next year I have to file in.
I have the new one.
Before April 24 and April 24.
The,
Yeah.
I got all the votes, but I didn't win,
Just
so,
like
yeah.
and
the
then the
November election next.
the more complicated definition that I can ever remember having. It goes on and on and on, self-funded. And I wish there was a better way to say it, but maybe there isn't. Okay.
I think if Tim and Sean have worked on that language, I feel comfortable with
I'm gonna
that.
do one.
I just think the amount is, I love to equal the people.
Well, I don't,
I'm too old for this.
See, amount, but the $1,000 sounds like it's been tested,
Unless you want to buy
that that's a floor that
I was
maybe lower than most states for PACs.
Right, but there is no requirement under Citizen United that we cannot require reporting. We are not setting a limit and saying you can't spend more than $1,000. We would be saying you have to tell us what you're spending.
But isn't that what we're doing here?
Yes, but we can lower that. $1,000
Right,
could be-
they're saying
but he
1,000.
said, based on lawsuits.
Were you in the room?
No, I had to step out and answer the
Sean,
question.
you'd be kind enough to share with us.
Oh, sure. I was just saying, I'm sorry, when you said last time, I couldn't remember who had said it. It was me in
Oh.
testimony last time, but not coming from me. Our office doesn't have a position on that. We're not opposed to going lower, but the concern was raised to us by the Attorney General's office when we were meeting about this
Right.
language. They voiced to us that while separate from the Citizens United and the cap that just, disclosing is allowed, that still there's been, I think, the concepts tested in the courts as far as what's considered a barrier. And that filing is somewhat of a barrier. It's seen okay if it's $1,000 or higher in court tests. That's been fine. The courts have sided on that side. They say when it's gone south of $1,000 is when there's been some issues with the courts. Again, I don't have the details. I'm not a lawyer either. I don't do enforcement. That's the Attorney General's side. But if you are considering going lower, I would suggest having the Attorney General's office in for testimony, as I suggest.
Appreciate that, but I would argue that it is a bigger barrier to an individual candidate than it is to a corporation. They have much more resources than an individual candidate does. If it holds up for us, I see no reason why it wouldn't hold up.
Darling, I'm on your side,
I know you are.
but I think
It just doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah, from the way,
If the committee would like, I can look into this, do some analysis to this question. Case law.
That'd be great.
and we go to the AG and we can see who's tested. So there's nobody who's tested it. Vermont would be testing it if we
I
just.
want it to be zero. You can report every damn dollar you spend.
Well, that would be
Right.
true for us too.
I had to. Everything.
You didn't.
Very
If you
sudden.
spent under $500,
No,
you
you
didn't have to
don't.
report anything.
If
I
you're an
think
individual spends
every
under
dollar spent should be reported.
Oh,
If you spend
I
$1
spent more than
towards an
We
election,
all
it's
did.
reported.
Or we wouldn't
Heck
be
yeah,
here. Senators all that.
you tell them.
I will.
Those small donors.
It's not that I have an issue with small
Small
donors. I just think it should,
donors
when
add up.
this doesn't actually impact the $100 cap for anonymous reporting. What this influences, what I'm saying is if I spend $499, I don't have to report that.
Yeah.
But if I spend $1, I should have to report that. I'm not suggesting we change the $100 cap for small dollar donors.
We know that. We know. She's just thinks every dollar of every campaign, no matter who is doing it, should be reported.
Yes, which is not what her bill proposes.
That is not what my bill proposes. I didn't realize there was this discrepancy between PACs and individual people.
People should be equal.
And I'm willing to compromise and just align them both at 500, but I philosophically think Citizens United is garbage, but philosophically think that every dollar spent to influence an election should be reported.
But I love about you, Tom.
And I like to pass the hat.
Okay, why don't we call it a day?
Sounds
A good day. Larry's ready to
It's right.
call it a day.
I gotta go put 350 flags out at cemeteries tonight.
Okay, well, that's a very good thing to do. Thank you.
Memorial Day isn't this weekend.
Well, I gotta just.
Oh, tomorrow, we're gonna walk through 397. And again, my hope is either tomorrow or Friday, we get that out.
Oh, are we
And
getting
where-
Eric to come in and weigh in on the
We
day?
can,
We're voting Rutland tomorrow.
and we'll vote out the Rutland Charter.
Yeah, and I'll do.
Thanks,
And
Tim.
each one. Oh,
What's
yeah,
that?
you got
I'm
Barry.
doing the Berry Charter because Pepper can send me it.
Yeah, on the floor. We're talking the committee.
Yeah.
Okay,